Am I the a-hole for not giving my roommates rent? I, 31, recently moved to a new country and got 3 roommates, 2 21s and a 24, to save on expenses while job searching. At first they seemed chill and nice enough to get along with, but about 3 months into living there is when it got intense. One of the 21 years olds was non-existent, so I won't talk much about her. The dynamic was very strange between the other 2 roommates, who I later found out were exes, but had an almost codependent mother-child dynamic, but they tried getting me into this family dynamic where I was expected to provide for them financially with groceries and driving them around places because I made more money than them when I found a job and was the only one with a car. At the beginning I didn't mind, and they said I didn't have to, but it was nice of me to offer. It slowly started to get to a point where they expected me to keep doing this, so when I mentioned that we should at least split the grocery bill or not eat out every day, they would agree but never do anything about it. I personally find it awkward to talk about money and ask for others to pay me back, so I started to look into moving out because I didn't want to stay in that environment. Come mid-October, we have mutual friends come to visit, and I decide to stay with them because I needed to be away from my roommates at the time to have a clear head and look at apartments. I'm then accused of hogging our mutual friends and forbidding my roommates from seeing our friends because I'm the only one with a car and didn't offer to drive them back and forth to the Airbnb to hang out with everyone. There was a big fight the next few days, and I couldn't take it anymore, so I rent a U-Haul and grab my stuff to start moving somewhere else. One of my roommates then tries something drastic. I won't get into detail, but I knew I couldn't live in there anymore. I was further proved right when she apologizes to me about the incident and tries to get me to move back in, saying things will be different now. I told her that I've paid for November but can't move back in, and that they can keep the rent and look for someone to replace me in the next 6 weeks. Fast forward to a few days before December, and they message me saying that they haven't found anyone and want me to pay for December rent because the lease won't allow anyone to move in until the new year because of how I left. The way I see it, I did my part by giving them NOV rent and tried to help find a roommate, but they refused and said they didn't want me as a middleman and would find someone on their own. They told me that they won't be able to pay for deck and that their third roommate hasn't been paying her share, and they now owe over $2,400 and don't have the money for it. Am I the a-hole for not helping? Am I the a-hole for telling my daughter, who is facing homelessness, that only her and the baby can move in with me, not her husband? The husband has lived in their apartment for a number of years. The owners recently sold it and the new ones are moving in, so my daughter and her husband have to move. The problem is rents have gone up dramatically. The rent they are paying is $1,100, which I thought was a lot, but now that I'm trying to help them find a place, most are now going for around $2,000 a month or more. They can't afford this. My daughter knows she is always welcome at home, granted a baby complicates things. I wasn't happy about her having a baby, but I would never deny her housing. However, I can't stand her husband. I wouldn't invite Aaron over for dinner, let alone let him live with me. Aaron's in his mid-30s. Criminal history. Hair trigger temper. Chronically immature and has one hell of a jealous possessive streak that has caused strain in their relationship. Honestly, when she told me she was pregnant, I finally thought we'd be rid of Aaron. I genuinely thought he's exactly the kind of man to ditch. Alas, if anything, it made him cling to her tighter. They had a very rushed wedding, and this is their longest stint together without any breakups. Just over a year. There's still been the fair share of dramatics, of course, but I am surprised they've made it this far. Even so, I simply don't want to live with Aaron. I don't like him. I don't want him around me. I'd go above and beyond for my daughter and the baby. They can stay as long as they need, but not him. Obviously, this has created a rift between my daughter and I. She doesn't want to live separately from Aaron. I told her then she needs to figure out alternative arrangements. Well, their move-out date is rapidly approaching and they've still not been able to find a place, and she's panicking. She's been begging me to let them stay. I reiterated my terms. Aaron simply cannot stay here. This led to a lot of tears and some angry words. Namely, me being an asshole. I can genuinely see why she might think that, but I also have to think about myself and my own sanity. Am I the a-hole for not allowing my sister to use my farm as her wedding venue? My late grandpa started his farm whilst he was in his early 20s. There were financial problems along the way, but it became successful, and he became rich. My late grandma, who died last year, grew up in the average working class home. My parents come from rich families and went to private schools and Ivy colleges. My mother and father always wanted 3 kids, 2 girls and 1 boy. I'm the youngest out of 3 girls, and my parents were desperately hoping their last child would be a boy, but since I was a girl, they were resentful to me and they didn't show any love to me, and I was pretty much treated like Cinderella. Because my parents showed resentment towards me, my sisters did too, and I was bullied by them, and they got away with it. We were treated differently as they both went to private schools, private colleges. They were also allowed to do whatever they wanted and eat whenever they wanted. I went to a public school, public college, and I was only allowed to eat 3 meals a day. I don't mind going to a public school, but I'm just trying to show how I was treated differently. At the weekends, I was shipped off to my grandmother's so they could have family time. At age 12, I asked my grandmother if I could live with her, and she agreed. As soon as she asked my parents, they immediately said yes and started packing my bags. Whilst going to my grandmother's at the weekend, she made me work on the farm. Even whilst living with her permanently, she continued to make me work on the farm at weekends. I hated that I have to work on the farms, and looking back now, I realized why she made me do it, as she made me work on the farm as a source of therapy, as I was constantly arguing and her animals were my therapy. I remember spending most of my days sitting with the horses and feeding the chickens. I also spent a lot of time running across her fields. My grandmother sadly passed away last year, and she left the whole estate to me, which my family wasn't pleased about. I decided to leave my job as a lawyer and work full-time on the farm, and I'm so much happier. When my grandmother was alive, she also used part of her fields for wedding venues and events. She also allowed charities to have events on her farm free of charge. 2 months ago, my sister got in contact with me after 4 years of no contact and said she's engaged, and asked me if she could use Grandma's field as wedding venue, as she would like to get married. The thing is, I can't let go of the past, and I have started therapy, but I told her I need some time to think about it. My first thought was to charge my sister a price for the venue and make it a price she couldn't afford, but it didn't feel right, so I simply said no. Now she's passed my number on to my parents and my other sister, and they're all saying this is my grandmother's farm and she should be allowed to get married on the farm, and I should even do it for free. My emotions are pretty high right now, and I need to know if AITA